part one. I'll start again. Investigations part one. It's part one because we reckoned we'd be squeezing far too much into this 1 hour session to cover what we think you would want to hear. So this first part is about getting the basics right and getting the process. This part one is about going through with you when you would actually do an investigation. When do you need one? And that's an enormous question for some organizations. Some organizations go into investigations very quickly, others a bit more slowly. So it's important to think about the why do it in the first place. We'll look at compliance, the law, etc. We'll look at the process that divided up in a way that we feel would be helpful to you. We look at the skills you need to do a good investigation, and then some of the challenges. But before we go too far with this, I've got a wee poll, if I can find it. There we go. You have no idea the fun we had yesterday trying to find this. So what we would like you to do is, there we go, is have a wee go through this poll so that we can just, are you seeing it as questions that you can fill in? No?
Not yet, Dorothy.
Not yet. Okay, let me redo it. I'll end it and I will relaunch it.
There we go.
Is that it, doing it properly?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Yep. Some looking hesitant here. Are you able to see it, folks? And able to enter your questions in it?
Yep, I've answered it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Excellent. And it's Angela, we put that wee monster in just for you.
Thank you, because I wanted it to be scary because it's Halloween.
You did. You did. Absolutely. So just really interesting to see if there's particular areas that, given what you're thinking, we could spend a wee bit more time on for the limited time that we do have. Interesting. Yeah. Interviews big. We'll share the results properly whenever we feel you've all put any comments in.
Hi, Karine, you've put in the chat you can't see anything. Are you meaning the initial poll or the results? So I don't think Dorothy shared the results yet.
Not yet. I think we've got about 26, 29 people. That's roughly whose number on the call, is it? I can't see the numbers here. Shall I end the poll? Yeah.
I think so, Dorothy, yeah.
Okay. There we go. Quite a significant amount of people who haven't done investigations before or have just done a few. Big issue, potentially more than anything else, the interviews. That's helpful to know. And managing workload, people being difficult. Yes. Yeah. Followed up by pressure, followed up by managing your own workload. Excellent. That's really helpful for us to know. And if I can get rid of it now, would be really helpful.
It's come off our screen, Dorothy.
Sorry?
It's come off our screen.
Good. Thank you very much. Okay, so that's helpful. Feel free to ask some questions, as Rona said, in those areas that you were highlighting. Clearly, a lot of people feeling the same. So let's look first at why you would do an investigation in the first place. And this might seem really straightforward, but we often get called in to help with either undertake an investigation or help someone, and we look at it and we think, blimey, did they really need an investigation for this? Perhaps sitting down with someone, it wasn't that serious and it could have been resolved very quickly. So it's thinking about it beforehand. And this really is for, I know there's a lot of decision makers on the call today, as well as people who might not be, but important to do that initial, we're calling exploration of the issues. That's that initial, right, okay, what's happened here, to identify what's the right answer, what is the right tool to use to resolve this situation. You've thought through other options, other ways of dealing with it, and they don't feel appropriate to the circumstances. There might have been a grievance and it's felt that a formal investigation is required to support a resolution. Perhaps it's issues that the company really needs to be clear as to what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. There's nothing worse than an organisation not undertaking an investigation into an issue that everybody's feeling is really critical. So really important to be thinking about those things. And of course, what are the risks to the organisation? What are the risks of not doing it? What are the risks of doing it? And some kind of examples of that, I'm sure you can all think of in your own organisation, but in a care organisation, for example, if there was an allegation of inappropriate treatment with a service user, absolutely appropriate to undertake an investigation into that, because there's high risks to the clients, risks to reputation, and absolutely issues that the organisation needs to be clear, need to be addressed, and need to send that message out to everyone. This is not acceptable behaviour. So getting that first step right as a manager or decision maker is really important to support the rest of this process. I'll look at compliance then. What you need to consider in terms of the rules of the game here. Rules of the game is not a game, is it? This last thing it is the law. There's no employment law that covers investigations. However, outcomes from tribunals make clear what is expected. And if I just pop this up, this is really important, the Birchall test, and it is important for investigators to know this. The Birchall test was a case back in 1978. Lord Denning, I believe I'm remembering that correctly, at an Employment Appeal Tribunal, where they wanted to be really clear as to, for unfair dismissal, what measures should we use to make that decision of fairness or unfair. And they came up with these three. The employer must have a genuine belief in the employee's guilt. Second one's critical for us in investigations. There must be reasonable grounds for that belief. And that means a reasonable investigation and gathered relevant evidence to support and substantiate that belief. Of course, the third one, acted reasonably in all circumstances. And that word reasonable under the circumstances becomes really critical in everything that, well, I suppose everything that we do in working with people, isn't it? But really important for investigations. So if you imagine you're doing an investigation relating to a potential gross misconduct, then this really comes into play in terms of what is reasonable and what isn't, in terms of your investigation and having enough appropriate evidence so that the decision maker can make a reasonable assessment. And it also reminds us to think about, if a case goes to an employment tribunal, they're not deciding whether the person is guilty or not guilty. They're deciding whether you had a genuine belief, you made that decision based on reasonable information, investigation and evidence, and you acted reasonably. So really important for us in terms of investigations. ACAS codes, they're not statutory, but ignore them at your peril. the ACAS codes, there's one for everything. A lot of the stuff in terms of people management, there is one in relation to discipline, grievance investigations, really helpful. If we're undertaking investigations and there's not a company policy that covers the process that we're undertaking investigation in, then we will refer to the ACAS code as our measures for the evidence that we're gathering. And of course, your own policies and your own policies and procedures, they need to, you're depending on HR, whether you're HR or whatever, you're depending on your HR or your manager responsible for people policies, that those policies reflect the ACAS codes and any relevant legal decisions that are going to impact on how you do things in your business. And of course, we know through the law, we know about the fair reasons for dismissal, and it's important for the investigator to have these in their mind, because you might be asked to undertake an investigation into a conduct issue, into a capability issue, or any of these areas. So conduct, they did something wrong, they should have known better. Capability, not doing what they should be doing, either because they're ill or because they have performance issues. Redundancy, we know what that is. Contravention of a legal duty, that relates to, an example of that is you've got a license to drive a big lorry, you lose that license, there's no other appropriate redeployment opportunities for you, so you could be dismissed for contravention of a legal duty. Some other substantial reason is the coverall for something that none of these other areas cover. And examples, for it's used very infrequently. I've, in all my kind of over 40 years in HR, never used it. We thought we would once. However, once we looked at the case and investigated it, we realized there was a lot of conduct issues in there. But an example of some other substantial reason, or a SOSR, could, one that's used mostly, I understand, is client relationships. So you have a client who's refusing to work with a particular employee. There are other examples, conflict of interest, employee conflict between each other, various things, which, however, I think majority of them, you would probably find a conduct issue in amongst them, or a capability. I would never use one of those reasons as a decision maker without checking it over with an employment lawyer to check that I was going down the right route. So it's important for investigators, because you're using a policy to measure your outcomes against. So you might be told, do the investigation under the conduct policy, capability policy, etc. I can see there's lots of comments coming through. Rona, you just stop me if you feel it's appropriate to ask some questions. I'll keep going if not. So compliance. Well, then we're going to look at the process. And we look at it in these 5 areas. Helpful to look at it in this structured way to make sure we're covering what we need to cover. So in terms of planning, terms of reference, we have, since this last 11 years operating in this business, the value of terms of reference is outweighs everything else, in that previously in-house terms of reference for investigations were few and far between, but there makes such a difference in terms of the investigator being absolutely clear as to what they're expected to do, as opposed to an email that says, can you investigate such and such? Really, really important. Relevant policies, absolutely critical to be looking initially. What are the relevant policies to this? Is it the conduct policy? Is there a code of conduct? Are there rules and regulations around a particular issue? Look for as much as you think is important and relevant. Are you the right person? Do you know the person? Do you know them too well? Have you, had issues with that person before, and they could easily say afterwards you were biased? So stuff like that. In small businesses, are you the right person? Becomes really difficult, where It's important, and tribunals will tell us it's important to separate out the investigation with the decision making. In small businesses, that's not such a big issue for tribunals. They do understand that you may not have enough people to carry out all of these different rules. But in our bigger organizations, then absolutely. Are you the right person? Ask yourself that before you start it. Thinking through what evidence you'll need to gather. So you're looking at who you'll need to see, plus all that other stuff. And I think we always find that, we gather what we see as relevant to the terms of reference, relevant to the issue that's presented that we need to investigate. We always get a lot more evidence given to us when we start to do our interviews with the individuals involved. But really important to think about these things in advance, as opposed to halfway through a meeting and you think, damn it, I should have got something that would really help me ask a question to this person. Think about how long you think it will take. And it's interesting, when we do we've got a one-day investigation skills workshop that covers all of this, but obviously in a bit more detail. And when we look at, let's think through how long it will take you to do this. And it's something that when you're in-house, you never need to think about, because you've been asked to do it. It's seen as part of your job, and you just get on with it in between other things. Or what used to happen I'm sure with a lot of us, is you're sitting at night typing up statements from interviews that you've had. But it's important to think about how much time you'll need. Think about, you're having the interview, how long will it take you to type it up? Then you've got the delay to get the person to agree to the note or otherwise. You're then looking at other people's calendars when they're free, all of that stuff. So an investigation might take 5 working days physically to do, but it might take 4 weeks to get that done, to catch everybody. And it's important to be thinking about it because, some of you clearly have said in the poll that you get pressure from your organization, and we all do. We get pressure as soon as the organization knows we've met everybody. It's like, when are we getting the report? But for you, it's important that whoever's asked you to undertake the investigation has a reasonable idea of how long it's going to take, so that pressure is not overwhelming for you, and you've highlighted that and highlighted your other priorities that you're having to either put aside or not, I suppose. Who you can take advice from? Is there someone in HR? Is there another manager? Is there somebody like us that you can give a shout to ask? Is an employment lawyer important? Who would you go through for that advice?
Dorothy,
Yes.
sorry, just before you move on from planning, I was thinking about terms of reference, because we're used to that phrase.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm just wondering if people on the call, if they're not used to that, if you can give some examples of what types of information might be in terms of reference.
Absolutely. We would have, let me just, all right, it's on there. Yeah. What we would have is a wee bit of background as to how the issue came to light. And actually, Angela, do you want to give this one? I'm sitting looking at you. You're doing these all the time. Do you want to go through it?
Yeah, sure. So you're right. So we do start off with just a wee bit of background as to why the investigations came to light. Then we look at, we sort of name who the person who's upset or who has the complaint or who has an issue against us. We've got a claimant, we've got a respondent, and then we've got witnesses. So their names are put in there so that we know everybody that we need to speak to. And a witness might be somebody who's actually witnessed an event that's happened, or who can maybe add some sort of background or context to it. And as you said earlier, Dorothy, what happens is normally when we start, you think, I'll only need to speak to this person, and this person. And then we maybe speak to the claimant or the respondent, and they say, well, but I can be backed up by this person. And so we then have to maybe speak to other people. So that's when an investigation can get a wee bit bigger or not, depending on whether the investigator thinks it's relevant to speak to that other person or not. We then look at what policy we're going to be using. So if it is a dignity at work claim, if it is a grievance, or if it is a disciplinary issue, then we make sure that that's highlighted at that part within the handbook or within that document is what we're going to be looking at as our measure. And then we detail out what the actual allegations are so that the investigator knows this is what the allegation is, and this is what we've got to find. Is that proven or is it not proven? We then move on to how long we give the client, or if you're internal, you would give the person that you're reporting into how long we think it would take. So we might say, we're going to interview these 3 people. We're looking at their calendars, that person's on holiday or that person's not available, and we try and give an estimate of when the interviews will be finished and when we think the report will be finished as well. And also just, you know, who we need to contact. We keep a wee note of the kind of key contacts as well for us. But that's the sort of information that's in the terms of reference. So just lays everything out really clearly, so that the investigator knows exactly what they need to do, and the organisation as well also knows exactly what's going to happen. So everybody's on the one sheet, if you like.
Thank you, Angela. That's really helpful. Rona, anything else you want to pick up?
Nothing else so
Nope.
far from the
Okay.
chat. Oh, hang on, there is just a comment come through. So somebody said, normally we would not expect our investigating officers to decide if it is proven or not. It would be for the disciplinary hearing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. The decision maker at the hearing. Yep. And that's the dividing the investigation to the decision making. Yep. Evidence gathering, and in terms of, you know, we talked about this being part 1 and then part 2. Hopefully it'll be towards the end of November. We'll get information about that out to everybody in a couple of days, I'm sure. We will look at the more complex stuff, which is the bullying, harassment, sexual harassment, discrimination, all of that side of it. So we'll not pick that up in this session, but we'll do it in a bit more detail next time. So you're capturing all the facts. Fair, thorough, we've talked about the virtual. It's remembering that evidence and your report will be examined in the decision-making hearing. It could be examined in an appeal. It could be examined at an employment tribunal. So it's absolutely critical that you're gathering appropriate evidence and evidence that's relevant. I once I was asked to support someone at a disciplinary hearing, and not something I'm used to doing. Usually, you know, HR, I'm always on the other side of the table, and asked by a friend of a friend, could you go along? I said, oh yes, okay, thinking I need to get my other hat on for this process. And the person who'd done the investigation had only looked at this side of management and hadn't looked at the employee's side. I was kind of flabbergasted, sitting thinking, why would you think that you only look at one side? But there you go. Some people still think that that's okay to do. Potential evidence, yeah, it kind of, we talk about it a bit like we've got all that information that you get at the start. You've done that really good prep and planning, and you're in the middle, and it's almost like a wee spiral where you go wider and wider until you think, no, I've got enough, and I've got corroboration or not corroboration that something did or didn't happen. We sometimes hear, although it's not occurrent, not with us these days, but we do have in the past heard that you have to be a specialist to do a specialist type investigation. So an example in my days in NHS, where an investigation related to medication, it was, well, how can you do that? Because you don't know. And your way to do that, obviously, is to find a professional witness with the specialist knowledge and interview them as a witness. And their information then helps you with other questions that you might have for other people.
Dorothy, we've also got a question coming about anonymous complaints.
Sorry?
So, anonymous complaints, how would we gather
Okay.
evidence in that situation?
Oh, okay. Yes, anonymous complaints, difficult, absolutely. It used to be back in the day, I'm going back to the 70s, back in the day, anonymous complaints were put in the bin. If they're not prepared to say who they are, then they're not prepared to look at it. But obviously we know now it's completely different. So you're looking at as much information as you're gathering from it, and then you're thinking, I'm saying the obvious here, is the allegation so significant and critical that I'd be remiss not to do it? And you're hoping that they give you enough information for a particular group. So let's imagine comes in to say that a particular area, there's I don't know, practices that are wholly inappropriate. You might then not undertake a discipline investigation. It might be an investigation into issues that have come to light and meet with individuals in that area, but not under a disciplinary process, more of a management investigation. And as one would go through that, meeting with people, raising issues about the areas that are in the anonymous complaint, getting to the stage where you think, actually, there's nothing to this, or there is something to this, referring back to your commissioning manager or deciding manager to say, I think there is a potential conduct issue here. I think we need to undertake this under a conduct policy relating to those 3 people over there. So corroboration is difficult, isn't it, with that? So that's why in some cases it's important to do that initial management review, management investigation, call it what you will, of the issues that's highlighted in the anonymous complaint. I've dealt with in the past one where an individual was accused, anonymous letter saying that a member of staff was on drugs whenever they were working, and they gave the name of the member of staff, and it was so potentially serious that we couldn't ignore it. And an appropriate person went to that individual to speak to them about it. There was a whole backstory that came out, of course, lots of resources into trying to sort out what was happening. At the end of the day, there was no evidence whatsoever, but it was something that we had to look at to protect service users.
And obviously somebody has come back linking in with whistleblowing as well, Dorothy.
Absolutely, absolutely. And whistleblowing, the first step, a whistleblowing complaint or whatever comes in, they have the protection of what's it called? Somebody will know the big long name, protected something or other, which protects whistleblowers to being treated to a detriment because they raised an issue. To be a whistleblower, it needs to be covered by, there's a range of areas covered by the Act. I wish I could remember the name of it. And to be called whistleblowing, it needs to be that they're significant in terms of seriousness. And yes, I suppose then there is an investigation. It could be a management investigation. It could be, the whistleblowing could be anonymous, it mightn't be. So yes, similar, except the whistleblowing, if it's covered by that part of the Protection of Something or Other Act, then it's that safety mechanism of not being treated to a detriment because you've raised an issue.
Yeah, they call it a PIDA, P-I-D-A.
That's right. Oh, PIDA, I know. Somebody help me with what that is. Something Disclosure Act, protection, something or other. Yeah.
Protected information disclosure.
There you go. That'll do. That'll do.
Public interest. There we go. Thanks,
Yes.
Graham.
Yes, thank you.
Just,
All right.
just out of interest, there's quite a few whistleblowing complaints come through this year, or anonymous ones as well. Or sometimes the type of investigations we take, halfway through the investigation, something comes to light that would potentially mean that that person who has raised it becomes a whistleblower. And we have to look at that as well. But they're more complicated type investigations, but it's more popular now, as you said years ago, Dorothy. Nobody would have taken it seriously, and these days a lot of employers do. And the other thing we also get asked about is when people hand in their notice and they put in a letter with their notice, a kind of final throw-in of information that can blow up almost. And there's a lot of companies do take that very seriously. and we'll look, as you said, a sort of management review or look at an investigation pending the issues that can come to light. So sorry, that was just to add on to the
Yes,
whistleblowing part.
absolutely,
Mhm.
absolutely, yeah. Okay. Evidence, anything else in evidence?
One more comment. What happens if evidence has been destroyed? For example, WhatsApp messages.
Oh, I'm sure we'll hear after the COVID stuff. I mean, we've had yeah, under the disclosure information, we've had requests to pass any WhatsApp, etc. There's no, if it's deleted, you can't do anything about it. And I've not seen any cases coming through yet where individuals have been challenged for destroying WhatsApp messages. There might well be after all of this COVID review and inquiry. We have an approach, and I guess it would be back to your IT policies and your data policies. We as a group, we would never put into a WhatsApp message something that was critical in terms of decision making or things that we need to do. It would always be emails. So I suppose the response to that is you shouldn't have people making major decisions through WhatsApp. That just doesn't feel right, doesn't it? But what can you do? It's gone. Okay. Interviews then. I'll just pop all these up just now, I think. Yep. There was quite a few commenting on that. I mean, with the interviews in our one day, we do a lot. We do a lot on interviewing, and we have we goes at it and some fun with it. But I suppose the big thing is it's your meeting. It's remembering you're in charge of it. It's your meeting. They need to know the allegations, but not chapter and verse. If it goes to disciplinary hearing, then they absolutely need to know everything and need to get a copy of the report and any appendices. But you don't need to give people everything right at the beginning of the investigation interview. If you do, then you're risking that individual perhaps going and deleting information, persuading other people, influencing it. So enough for them to be able to answer questions, but not too much more than that. They will know when you sit down with them what areas you're getting at, and they can also, after the interview, the person you would, and we always say, if you think of anything else that's relevant to what we've been talking about, come back and let us know, and we'll meet again. Prepare questions in advance. Important, just to give you that edge of feeling comfortable and making sure you cover everything that you feel you need to cover. Make sure you've looked at your policy so you know what the representation notice of meetings is for your organisation. The building rapport, absolutely critical, and sustaining it throughout the meeting. Rapport can sometimes be broken. We know you might break it because you ask a question, you think that's the wrong way to ask that question. And you need to gather it back. You say, sorry, I've asked that the wrong way. Let me rephrase that. You just take responsibility and the confidence to keep with it. Ask great open questions and follow up on responses. We were asked to look at an investigation for a company who weren't happy with what had been done. And when we saw the investigation notes of the meeting, it was a typed up list of question and then space for a handwritten answer. Question, space for a handwritten answer. And there was absolutely no follow-up. That's not enough. Whatever the person is coming back to you with, there's generally, unless it's yes or no, there's generally more questions that you can ask. Tell me a bit more about that. What happened there? Who else was there? all of those things.
I think, Dorothy, there's a question from Graham which links in with this nicely, actually. So he's talking about when there's more than one witness and to avoid bias. Do you suggest having a standard list of questions wherever possible? I guess that would be your starting point.
A starting point, yeah. Yep. If two people were there saying they saw the same thing, then I would have a list at the same list for both, but it's bound to change as you go through according to
Yeah.
how they respond to it. It's the follow-up. The first question is not the important one. It's the follow-up that becomes where you get the real information from, and that's a bit about your questions being open, and tell me more about that. Tell me what happened. Be empathetic without agreeing with the person. That can sometimes be quite hard, where somebody's telling you something and it's like you think, oh my goodness, that's dreadful, but of course you're having to say that must have been really difficult for you, as opposed to that's dreadful. As I've said, it's your interview, so you're in charge of it, not the person you're interviewing. And we know people can be with strong personalities, can be quite challenging, and we'll look at some of that in a moment. Separating fact from opinion. Observation from third-party comment. We've seen reports from folk where they've said 3 people said that XYZ happened, and yet when you look at it, only one saw it. The other 2 heard that the one had seen it, and it came out as 3 people. So, direct observation and third-party, really critical. Query and probe, I've talked about. Challenge when necessary. There's nothing wrong with saying, you've said that just now, but earlier on you told me something different. Absolutely. Good notes are critical. The majority of issues that can come is when you haven't got a good note taker. Taking good notes of a meeting like this, it can be really challenging. We always do non-verbatim notes. The verbatim ones end up being miles long and they don't make sense. So the non-verbatim is much more helpful. And be clear about what happens next. We've got templates that we use, and we've got the wording at the beginning and the wording at the end is common for every interview that we do, and we just adjust it for whatever policy we're using. And that's helpful to do when you're in your own company. I'm going to whiz on. I'm conscious of the time here. So analysis, analyse and present in an objective manner. No assumptions. Versions of event, that's fine, as long as it's reflecting what the person said. You're looking for corroboration. Strong evidence, we've talked about anonymous. Strong evidence, of course, is I saw it. Then it is appropriate to have evidence of, well, they told me that happened. It's it's more weak, but it's still evidence. There was a case some time ago where an individual, a female, was in a location room, whatever, with 2 guys, and she came out of that room crying, and reported that she'd been sexually harassed. The investigation was done, and the investigator only spoke to the women and the 2 men, and the conclusion was 2 word against 1, so it couldn't have happened. It went to tribunal, and the tribunal said you needed to look at much more than just what those 2 people said. You needed to look at what happened afterwards. Was there anything that happened before? What was the relationship like before? Were they working together? All of those things. But absolutely critical, that evidence of she came out the room crying, as opposed to she came out the room laughing and joking. Very, very important. So, it's about that bigger picture all of the time, not just this little bit in the middle of Monday at 2:00. We talked about anonymous, and we've mentioned one word another. Credible. Yep. Is the evidence credible? Are they keeping changing their mind as to what they tell you? Are they only giving you more information whenever they know that you know a wee bit more than what you've said? Always important to highlight that. Timelines, we find them really, really helpful to produce a timeline of what happened when. It's a kind of summary. It can often produce a pattern for you that you didn't know was there. So really, really helpful. And standards of proof. So we're looking at balance of probability. And balance of probability is, and our employment lawyers tell us, it's if you're 51% convinced that something happened based on all of that reasonable investigation. I have to say, we always look for a bit more than that. 51% feels a wee bit kind of risky, but that's what they tell us. And I think that lets me motor on to report. Maybe what I do here is pop it all up and maybe talk through what we do. We have an introduction which covers, this is the company, this is what happened, this is how it came to attention, which is probably lifted from the terms of reference. We cover the policies that we're asked to look at. We pull out the relevant bits of those policies. We have a description of how we went about the investigation, and then we move into the allegations. So allegation, evidence that we've gathered from the individual, the complainant, respondent, and witnesses, and any other paper documents that we've gathered. And then we've got an analysis part where we analyse evidence for and against and come up with, we believe there is sufficient information here to suggest that this needs to be addressed through your process. And that's how we attach all the appendices, and we take the position that your deciding manager shouldn't, you want them to, but they shouldn't need to read all the appendices to know what happened. Because if you're leaving too much for the deciding manager to do, then in terms of reading all the appendices, the chances are they might come up with a different outcome because they're not as, are different in their minds, just a different way of looking at it, because they're not as close as you are to it. So it is really important to do this report, and you're analysing things in summary form so that the deciding manager finds it easier to work through. The formatting, paragraph numbers and pages, if I'm sure a number of us have been at meetings where folk are trying to find the page about such and such and what so and so said, and you're spending 10 minutes trying to find it. It's absolutely critical. And if it's a dismissal and goes to employment tribunal, you're talking about bundles that are very, very large. I'm going to whiz on. So we've got a bit of room for some final questions. Empathy and rapport, talked a little bit about it. The difference with empathy and sympathy, isn't it? Sympathy is, I'm down in that hole with you because I'm just with you. Empathy is like, let me help you with this. And rapport, which I'm sure we're all partly aware of. The act of listening. For investigation meetings, absolutely critical. You're summarize to clarify. So someone comes up with, you've asked, tell me what happened. You're summarizing it with what you've said to me is. Paraphrasing, again, is playing back to check your understanding. If you've picked it up wrong, they'll soon tell you. If you've picked it up right, they'll be delighted that you've listened. So all worth doing. Acknowledge feelings and emotion. Some folk worry that if they, acknowledge, oh, you're very angry about this, that the person will get angrier. No, it's the opposite. They know that you've seen and you've noticed. I'm going quickly here. The best question to start an investigatory meeting in, once you've given all the pre-run, is tell me what happened. And go from there. You can ask loads of questions from there in terms of all of the, tell me a bit more about that. How did that happen? Why do you think? How did you feel? All those wonderful open questions get you loads of information, and you'll already have your list that you prepared beforehand. And as you go through, you're comparing, well, what did I need to ask, and how do I get that information right? But all of those great content, procedure, interaction, and feelings, really, really critical. And tell me what happened. Look for body language. Look for, as I've said before, during and after, not just 12 o'clock on Monday. You're wondering what happened before, what happened after. Look, are people justifying what's happened? Are they giving you loads and loads of detail from before, and then when the incident happened, they're just whizzing through it and giving you loads of detail after? You're looking for all these signs of where you need to ask more questions and dig in a bit more. Challenges, people just not turning up. Your policy will cover what your approach to that is. How many times do you let person not turn up? And that will depend on the why. Did they let you know? Did they tell you after, oh, I was ill? You know, did they have a good reason for it? At the end of the day, if someone continues to not turn up, then you proceed with your investigation without the benefit of the information that they have. But you would always check that out with your deciding manager as to whether they were comfortable with that approach. Someone who keeps cancelling, so you never get to the meeting, they keep cancelling, same as before. You want to know what the reasons are. If the reasons are reasonable, then you give them more chances. Your policy probably cover it. If they're not, then you would go to your deciding manager and agree or otherwise to proceed with your investigation without the benefit of their information. Sometimes you can, if someone, you know, they're saying they're ill, they can't go. A normal approach would be to refer someone to occupational health to say all the usual stuff, but is this person fit to attend a investigatory meeting? Usually occupational health, unless someone was very ill, would say, do you know, I think it'll help if they go because they're off, because they're stressed about what's happening. You can, if continuing in all of these, you know, another layer would be to send a list of questions to someone and ask them to return the answers. So there's all sorts of ways of trying to get information from the person before you would go ahead without them. And then we've got these guys, haven't we? The difficult folk, the angry, the petulant, and the tearful. And I guess what we would always say is you have to acknowledge what you're seeing, but it's your meeting. And this brings us on to what you'll hear us saying an awful lot, is using our DEAL acronym. You know, describe what they're doing, which isn't helpful. Explain the impact, acknowledge their emotions, and let them know what they need to do differently. So when you're angry and raising your voice, I'm not able to get the information I need. I know, I can see that you're angry and upset, but I really need you to answer my questions. And that could be, I can see you're really upset, you're tearful, blah, blah. I'm not able to continue with what we're doing unless you can answer my questions. Usually that brings people down. If they continue to be difficult, then you stop the meeting. It's your meeting. You stop it. You say, we're going to come back in half an hour because you don't want to lose them. You want them to come back. Go and get a cup of coffee. Go and take a breath of fresh air and come back in half an hour. If it continues, then you stop it. You don't have to be in receipt of someone behaving badly. And you know, we've numerous times undertaken investigations, and the person we're interviewing is doing exactly the same with us as the reason that we're undertaking the investigation. So, you know, it comes out, doesn't it? Now I'm going to stop there because I'm conscious it's 5:01. I'll come off this, and Rona, questions, anything that we really need to cover before we go?
So there's a couple of questions from Caroline, which was looking at the structure of the hearing, recording that, and then including witness statements as part of the report. So the first question was really about, is there a preferred format?
For the investigatory interview?
Yes.
Yeah.
And recording it.
And recording it. I think I mentioned that we have a standard start to the investigatory interview and finish. So the start will be, we are here today for an investigatory interview relating to such and such on such and such a date. This is under the whatever policy, what we discussed today will be written up into a note. What we'll do with that note, it'll remain confidential except for the manager that we pass the information to. So it should be the same for every meeting, but just slightly different according to what's happening. And then we go into each of the allegations. Tell me what happened about such and such. So you work your way through all of that. One of the last things you do is you say, is there anything else that you feel we need to know that's important? That becomes critical for mitigation, because if mitigation comes out in the meeting, that's useful because then you can look into it. So really helpful to bring out, is there anything else you think is important? And then it's about, I'll go away, write the notes up. It'll be sent to you to check that you feel they're an accurate reflection of the discussion that we had today. What for send the notes back to, if they want to add stuff, just sort of logistics around it, and remind them about confidentiality. So the consistent bits, the beginning and the end, to make sure you cover those bits. If the policy says that they have a right to be represented at the investigatory meeting, there's no legal right to be represented, but there might be for your business, and they don't have anyone with them, then you have to say, I see that you don't have anyone with you. Are you comfortable continue on that basis? So you're covering the various requirements.
That's great, Dorothy. And Graham actually mentioned about the ACAS website having resource templates and things. So that's a really useful suggestion there to have a look at that.
Yeah, that's yeah. There's lots of stuff, if you Google investigatory interviews, you'll get loads of information. The universities seem to have an awful lot of information on investigations. I guess this 1 hour doesn't tell you how. It gives you the context. It gives you all the things that you need to be careful with. Getting a bit of practical help with it will take more than an hour, and that's what we use for our 1 day seminar, which we do locally in clients' premises.
That or the mentoring support as well can be a really useful way of going through your first investigation.
Absolutely.
There was another great question actually from Danny, talking about historic allegations. So if you've got some allegations come through and then historic allegations are brought up, is there a timeline of how far back is reasonable to investigate?
That depends on the issues and the company, and most employers would check that out with an employment lawyer, because those timings change according to different tribunal decisions. Some of the Parliament stuff that was happening, I can't remember if it was Scottish Parliament or UK, before they started investigations, there was a conscious declaration that they would go back a number of years or wouldn't. So it's important when it is a harassment, bullying case to think that through, because it's inevitable. If there's coming lots of good, lots of evidence, then people will come out the woodwork and say that happened to me. So it's a really good question, and a really important one to be thinking about right at that planning stage. Great question. Yeah.
And just one last, if we can squeeze it in 1 minute, it's actually a comment, but it's a really useful one about supporting both those accused and witnesses throughout the process, and how important it is to make sure that's there.
And we're more inclined to support the person who's making the allegations, because they've made the allegations and they're upset, etc. However, the person the allegations are against can sometimes be left in limbo and isolation, because they're told not to, if they're suspended in particular, don't contact the workplace, etc. And a lot of companies put together a process of having a contact person for the person who's suspended, to just keep in contact with them and keep in touch, because it can be a very lonely place. Yeah.
Matt's has hit 1 o'clock, so we will be starting to lose people, Dorothy. So
Yeah.
just want to say a massive thank you to you for delivering the session and also for everyone for attending. Do you want to say a quick word about part 2 before we go?
Yes, just quickly, part 2 will be looking at the more complex stuff. So the assumption will be you've seen this, and we'll get straight into bullying, harassment, discrimination, grievances, and some of the ways and measures that we need. With conduct, did they do it or did they not? With bullying, harassment, it can get a lot more difficult. So we will run through some of the key things that will really, really help with that. And we'll